In the tranquil expanse of the wilderness, a former military soldier named Jake Thompson found solace away from the chaos of his past. At 35, Jake was a veteran of 2 tours in Afghanistan, where he honed skills that were now second nature: survival tactics, first aid, and a steadfast resilience in the face of danger. The rigorous training had imbued him with not just physical strength but also an unyielding resolve that guided his every action. After leaving the army, he sought a quieter life as a park ranger, driven by a love for nature and a desire to protect the vast landscapes that resonated deeply with him. On this fateful day, as Jake embarked on his usual patrol through the dense woods, he felt at peace amidst the rustling leaves and chirping birds. However, that tranquility was soon shattered. Meanwhile, Sarah Mitchell was traversing the same wilderness, but her journey had become a nightmare. An avid hiker, she had set out to tackle the challenging trails alone, seeking an escape from her congested city life. Yet, an unexpected turn of events, a sudden storm, had altered her plans. As rain poured in torrents, visibility diminished, and the once familiar paths transformed into treacherous terrains. Disoriented and fearful, Sarah slipped while scrambling down a steep incline, injuring her ankle in the process. Alone and unable to walk properly, she had no choice but to find shelter beneath a thick grove of trees as night began to fall. With every passing minute, panic seeped into her thoughts. She had prepared for many things but never considered being stranded far from help. It was in this vulnerable state that her fate would soon intertwine with Jake's unassuming presence in the woodland around her. Their encounter would shift from solitude to an unexpected camaraderie forged through adversity. As the clouds began to gather ominously above, Sarah Mitchell was blissfully unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon. She had planned this hiking trip for weeks, eager to escape the confines of her bustling urban life and reconnect with nature. The lush trails of Oak Hollow National Park promised serenity and adventure, a perfect setting for her spirited exploration. With her backpack filled with essentials, water, snacks, and a trusted map, she set off early that morning, feeling invigorated and hopeful. The trail started smoothly, winding through vibrant foliage and showcasing breathtaking views. However, as the afternoon wore on, dark clouds rolled in swiftly, casting shadows that chilled her enthusiasm. The weather turned unexpectedly severe. Rain began to fall in heavy sheets, turning the solid ground into treacherous mud. Visibility plummeted as sharp gusts of wind whipped through the trees, creating an air of uncertainty that sent jagged nerves coursing through Sarah's veins. Desperate to find a safe place to ride out the storm, she pressed forward against the elements. Her focus narrowed to putting one foot in front of the other. But as she navigated a particularly steep incline, her footing betrayed her. A sudden slip sent her tumbling downwards, and she cried out in shock as pain shot through her ankle upon landing awkwardly on the uneven ground. Isolated in a remote area of the park, far from any signs of civilization or trails she recognized, Sarah felt panic begin to rise within her. She managed to drag herself beneath a cluster of thick trees for shelter, but with night approaching and no means of communication or help, fear began to suffocate her spirit. In that moment of vulnerability, she realized just how unprepared she truly was for this unforeseen circumstance. And it was only then that fate would intervening in the form of Jake Thompson's imminent arrival. As the storm's fury raged, Jake Thompson was finishing up his patrol when he noticed the sudden change in weather. The winds howled ominously through the trees, prompting him to quicken his pace toward the ranger station. However, as he navigated through the thicket, something caught his attention. A faint sound amidst the cascade of raindrops. It was a muffled cry, distant yet desperate. Curiosity piqued, Jake's instincts kicked in. That voice drew him into the underbrush, where visibility was waning and shadows danced wickedly. As he pushed past a cluster of branches, the scene unfolded before him. A young woman huddled beneath a grove of trees, her face pale and contorted in pain. The sight struck him like a bolt. It was an all-too-familiar scenario, a person in distress, and it ignited an immediate surge of purpose within him. "Hey, are you all right?" Jake called out, rushing toward her while assessing her condition with trained eyes. The woman's gaze darted up, wide with surprise yet clouded by fear. She managed a shaky nod but winced as she shifted her weight. A quick glance confirmed his worst fears. Her ankle was swollen and likely sprained. Without hesitation, Jake knelt beside her and introduced himself as both soothing and authoritative as he'd been taught during his military service. "You're going to be okay," he assured her decisively. "We need to get you out of here." His mind raced through options. How could he stabilize her injury and ensure they were safe before darkness enveloped the forest completely? Despite the urgency of their situation, Jake also felt an unexpected connection forming with Sarah, an unspoken bond born out of shared vulnerability. In that moment, both had transitioned from solitary lives into a partnership bound by necessity, each relying on the other as they faced this unforeseen challenge together against nature's relentless tempest. As Jake knelt beside Sarah, the intensity of the storm surrounded them, but in that small cocoon of trees, a fragile sense of calm emerged. "What's your name?" he asked gently, looking into her wide, fearful eyes. "I'm Jake." "Sarah," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. She shifted uncomfortably on the ground, wincing at the pain radiating from her ankle. "I didn't think anyone would find me out here. I thought I'd have to spend the night alone." Jake's heart ached for her vulnerability. "You're not alone anymore, Sarah," he said firmly, trying to instill confidence in her. "We're going to get through this together." He could see the tears brimming in her eyes, and he sensed the weight of her fear, the fear of being stranded, of being helpless in an unforgiving wilderness. "What if you can't help me? What if we can't get out of here before dark?" Sarah's voice cracked with anxiety as she glanced anxiously at the thickening darkness beyond their shelter. Jake could feel the panic seeping into the space between them, threatening to overshadow his reassurances. "Listen," he said, keeping his tone steady and comforting. "I know this area well. I've trained for situations like this. First, let's check your ankle, and then we'll figure out a plan. You're strong. I can see that already." He needed her to believe that they would make it out together. Sarah searched his face for sincerity and found it there. A calm determination that gave her a flicker of hope amidst the storm's chaos. "Okay," she whispered, focusing on his words as he gently examined her swollen ankle. In that moment of shared vulnerability, they began to forge a connection that would help them face the trials ahead, each drawing strength from the other as they navigated through an uncertain night. After introducing himself and gaining Sarah's trust, Jake's mind shifted into high gear, focusing on the assessment of their situation. He crouched beside her, carefully examining her injured ankle. The swelling was significant, and he gently prodded it to determine the extent of her injury, gauging whether she could bear weight on it. "It's going to hurt," he warned softly, "but I need to know what we're dealing with." Sarah winced as he touched the area, but she nodded, doing her best to endure the pain. Observing her reaction, Jake concluded that while the injury was serious, it didn't appear to be fractured, at least not yet. However, they were running out of time. The storm continued its relentless assault, and daylight was fading rapidly. Jake's experienced eyes scanned their surroundings, noting the deepening shadows cast by the trees encircling them. The wind whipped branches overhead into a wild dance, creating eerie sounds that amplified the feeling of isolation. He knew they were in a remote area of the park, far from trails and rescue routes, which heightened his sense of urgency. If night fell before they were able to move, staying put could expose them to additional dangers, hypothermia from the cold air, or worse, wild animals drawn by their presence. "Listen," he said, meeting Sarah's gaze with determination. "We need to find shelter that's safer. I don't want you out here when it gets completely dark." He started surveying their options within the confined grove, searching for an area more sheltered from the elements that could provide them a temporary refuge until they could figure out a plan. Time was of the essence, and making decisions quickly yet carefully would be crucial to their survival. In that moment, Jake relied on both his training and instincts. The lessons learned in service now applied with equal weight in civilian life as he prepared them for the challenges ahead. With the storm still raging overhead and darkness creeping in, Jake knew they needed a solid plan to ensure their safety and comfort. He began by mentally assessing the resources at hand. Sarah's backpack lay nearby, which likely contained some essentials, and his own ranger gear was equipped with basic first aid supplies and a flashlight. "First things first," he said, kneeling beside her backpack. "Let's see what you have." Sarah handed him her bag, and he rummaged through its contents, finding a water bottle, snacks, an emergency blanket, and a small first aid kit. The items would be critical in providing immediate relief as well as some sustenance and warmth. "Okay, we're going to create a safe space for you while I tend to your ankle," Jake explained. He had seen many injuries in his service but had never had to treat someone under such dire circumstances. He carefully took out the first aid supplies and began preparing to stabilize her ankle. "It's important that we stay warm," Jake continued, glancing upwards at the thickening branches that would shield them somewhat from the rain. "We can use this emergency blanket to keep you warm while I wrap your ankle." As he worked quickly yet carefully, he ensured she stayed engaged in conversation. "Do you know where we are? Did you see any landmarks before you fell?" He wanted to keep her focused on something other than the pain. Once her ankle was secured with gauze, Jake formulated the next part of their plan. "After this, I'll scout around for a more sheltered spot nearby, somewhere that'll provide better cover from the elements." He glanced up at the canopy above, considering where they could find a safer refuge without straying too far in case she needed him. "Just hang tight," he reassured her one last time before setting off into the encroaching gloom. "I'll be back before you know it." With every step he took away from Sarah, he felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, the need to return with good news and a plan that would ensure both their survival through the tempest of night. As Jake ventured away from Sarah into the thickening darkness, he faced an onslaught of challenges that tested both his physical endurance and emotional fortitude. The storm battered him relentlessly, wind slicing through his clothes as he navigated the treacherous terrain. The muddy ground sucked at his boots, making each step laborious and uncertain. He had to be careful. One misstep could lead him to a precarious fall, mirroring the plight of the woman he was trying to help. Every sound around him became amplified, the crack of branches in the wind, the swish of rain against leaves, and with each new noise, memories from his military days crept back in. While he had faced dangers before, this was different. The weight of Sarah's safety hung heavily on him. It fueled a fierce determination but also ignited a flicker of anxiety. Would he find a suitable shelter in time? What if he failed her? With every minute spent searching, his thoughts raced ahead to their next steps. Would they have enough supplies to last through the night? He cursed himself for not having brought more gear or better preparations. Jake had always prided himself on being a responsible ranger. Yet here he was, scrambling for solutions amidst nature's fury. At one point, he stumbled upon a rocky outcrop that offered some respite from the rain. As he leaned against it for a moment, catching his breath, guilt washed over him. Was Sarah truly safe alone? He shook off the thought and pressed on, knowing he couldn't afford to dwell on worries that might paralyze him. Finally spotting an area thinned by trees and overlapping branches that provided better coverage from the elements, Jake breathed a small sigh of relief. He marked its location in his mind and made his way back to Sarah with renewed urgency and purpose. Reunited in their small refuge later on would require strength, his resilience channeling into her spirit as they faced not just the storm outside, but also any fears that lingered within their hearts. When Jake returned to Sarah, a subtle shift in the atmosphere enveloped them. The rocky outcrop he had found provided a temporary respite from the storm, and the emergency blanket helped shield her from the biting cold. As they settled into their makeshift shelter, Jake recognized that beyond physical needs, they also had to address the emotional strain of their situation. "Let's take a moment to breathe," he said, his voice steady yet warm, aiming to ease her anxiety. "Tell me about your hike. What made you want to come out here?" Sarah hesitated at first but gradually opened up about her love for hiking and how she sought adventures away from her hectic job in the city. With enthusiasm lighting up her voice, she painted a picture of trails she had conquered and sights she'd seen, a stark contrast to her current predicament. Jake listened intently, his training fostering a sense of empathy as he absorbed her words. In turn, Jake shared stories from his time in the military, focusing on moments of camaraderie with fellow soldiers and overcoming obstacles together. He recounted amusing anecdotes about their misadventures during training exercises mixed with tension-filled moments that tested their mettle. These stories painted a vivid picture of resilience and teamwork, principles that resonated deeply in their current environment. As they exchanged tales, Sarah began to relax noticeably. The connection between them strengthened through this dialogue. Laughter occasionally broke through their serious surroundings when Jake teased himself about getting lost on simpler hikes or misjudging weather forecasts. An honest admission that lightened the mood amid fear. "I've learned that it's okay to feel scared," he assured her, looking directly into her eyes to reinforce his sincerity. "What matters is how we push through." This exchange not only distracted Sarah from her pain but also built a foundation of trust between them. One founded on shared vulnerability and understanding as they faced the uncertainty of the night ahead together. In that fragile moment of companionship forged by adversity, both found hope amid chaos. As the hours dragged on, the storm showed no signs of relenting. The howling wind and relentless rain created an almost hypnotic rhythm, their syncopation signaling both danger and a strange comfort as Jake and Sarah waited together in their makeshift shelter. Time became fluid. They were no longer just two individuals stranded by circumstance, but rather two souls entwined in a joint struggle for survival. The initial adrenaline that had surged through Jake began to wane, replaced by an unwavering vigilance as he continually scanned their surroundings, listening for any signs of help, or worse, additional threats. His mind fluctuated between pragmatic thinking and fleeting worries about Sarah's condition. He regularly checked on her, adjusting the emergency blanket and ensuring she remained warm. Each time he looked into her eyes, he saw a mix of fear and determination. It mirrored his own internal battle. In the first hour, they shared stories that diffused the anxiety swirling in the air, laughter punctuating their conversation. Yet as time passed, moments of tension crept in. The shadows lengthened ominously around them, occasionally interrupted by flashes of lightning that illuminated their fragile sanctuary. Each crack of thunder resonated with trepidation. Was it rescue, or more obstacles on the horizon? With every passing minute that felt like an eternity, hope began to blur around the edges. Would they truly be found? As darkness enveloped the landscape outside their shelter, both Jake and Sarah fought against despair creeping over them. Then came an undeniable moment of connection. In the dark quiet between storms, they exchanged silent glances filled with unspoken promises to face whatever was ahead together, resolute in their newfound bond forged through adversity. In those 5 hours of waiting filled with uncertainty and tension, they learned to trust one another deeply, each heartbeat echoing with the realization that survival meant more than just endurance. It was about shared strength amid chaos. As the storm finally began to relent, an eerie stillness enveloped the forest. Jake and Sarah, worn but resilient after hours of waiting, exchanged cautious glances, both sensing that something was changing in the atmosphere. Suddenly, a distant thumping sound broke through the damp silence, growing louder with each passing moment. Jake's heart raced as he recognized it, the unmistakable sound of rotor blades slicing through the air. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice barely containing the tremor of hope. Sarah nodded, her expression shifting from uncertainty to tentative excitement. The sound grew more pronounced, a rhythm that echoed their racing hearts. They strained to listen, their previous apprehensions momentarily forgotten. The helicopter's approach sent vibrations through the ground and rattled the branches overhead, an exhilarating reminder that help was indeed on the way. Jake peered into the rain-soaked darkness, searching for any sign of light cutting through the murky sky. He could hardly believe that relief was so close. "I think it's coming," Jake exclaimed, a smile breaking through his tension. The anticipation hung heavy in the air as they listened intently, adrenaline coursing through their veins. The rain had begun to taper off, and for the first time in hours, they felt a flicker of genuine optimism. Perhaps their ordeal would soon end. But alongside that hope came anxiety. What if it was too late? Would they make it out before night descended again? Sarah's eyes sparkled with tears as she squeezed Jake's hand tightly, a shared understanding passing between them. They had fought bravely against adversity together and now faced this moment of potential salvation. Suddenly, beams of light pierced through the trees as the helicopter emerged from the clouds above. Its searchlight swept over them, casting shadows that danced across their makeshift shelter. Jake waved frantically, signaling their location while Sarah shouted in elation. Relief washed over them like the rain had just moments before, a confirmation that they were no longer alone in this wilderness fight. As the helicopter hovered nearby, anticipation turned into action. Hope had finally arrived to guide them home. The helicopter descended slowly, its powerful rotor blades chopping through the damp air, sending gusts of wind that danced around Jake and Sarah. The searchlight cast a wide beam across the clearing, illuminating every shadow that had haunted them during their long night. As the machine touched down on the ground with a slight thud, a thick cloud of dust and debris swirled around them, momentarily obscuring their view. Jake's heart raced with a tumultuous mix of relief and disbelief. Finally, help had arrived. He and Sarah exchanged an electrifying glance. In that moment, unspoken emotions filled the space between them. A triumph over fear and uncertainty. Breathless with anticipation, they watched as the helicopter's door swung open, revealing a team of soldiers clad in tactical gear, moving with practiced efficiency. "Stay back!" one soldier shouted above the noise of the rotors, waving them to safety as he leaped out onto the ground. Instinctively, Jake stepped protectively in front of Sarah, ready to shield her from any unforeseen chaos that might erupt from the unfolding rescue operation. "Are you okay?" another soldier asked urgently as he approached them, quickly assessing Sarah's condition. Jake nodded vigorously, while Sarah managed a tremulous smile despite her fatigue and pain. The sight of these familiar faces, fellow soldiers who embodied strength and safety, brought an immediate sense of validation. A sense of camaraderie washed over Jake as he recognized one soldier from his military days. They exchanged quick nods filled with mutual respect and understanding. In that brief moment, it became clear that his training and life experiences had led him to this point, not just for himself but also for Sarah. With swift precision, the soldiers carefully assisted Sarah onto a stretcher, while Jake relayed crucial details about her injury. Emotions surged within him. Pride in having helped her through this harrowing night mingled with overwhelming gratitude for their timely arrival. As they lifted her up towards the waiting helicopter, both Jake and Sarah felt a fresh wave of hope wash over them, signaling an end to their ordeal. They were no longer alone. Salvation was within reach as they prepared to ascend back into safety together. As Jake and Sarah were lifted from the forest floor by the helicopter, a profound sense of transformation washed over them. In those harrowing hours spent together, they had not only fought against the elements but also discovered the depths of their own courage. Jake, a former soldier accustomed to facing life-and-death situations, found renewed purpose in his role as protector. His military training had equipped him with survival skills, but it was his capacity for empathy and kindness that truly shone during this crisis. For Sarah, the experience was equally enlightening. What began as a solo hike-seeking adventure had turned into a test of resilience. She had entered the wilderness seeking an escape from her busy life, only to find herself at the mercy of nature's fury. Yet, through Jake's unwavering support, she discovered her own strength in vulnerability and learned that even in moments of despair, human connection could provide hope. Their encounter underscored a universal truth about bravery. It is often not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it head-on alongside another person that defines true courage. It highlighted how kindness can flourish in desperate times, igniting bonds that may not have formed otherwise. The connection they forged, the silent understanding and shared struggles, became a testament to the power of human spirit when pushed to its limits. As they looked down at the forest shrinking below them, both felt an overwhelming gratitude, not just for their rescue but for each other. They had entered that wilderness as strangers but emerged as allies bound by their trials. In that shared experience lay a reminder that, regardless of challenges faced in isolation, together they could navigate through darkness towards light. This journey would remain etched in their hearts forever, a poignant reminder of bravery, kindness, and the profound connections formed in moments of crisis.